The EU has launched tariffs on Chinese-made EVs, which went into effect on October 30th and will last for about 5 years, so which range from 7.8% for cars produced in Tesla's Shanghai plant and up to more than 35% for Chinese brand like SAIC. So China rejected the European Commission's decision to impose extra duties on China-made EVs, denouncing the move as protectionist. So let me have Adam. So Adam, first of all, what's your interpretation of the EU move? We found out that the tariffs now being announced is a bit slightly lower than they are first announced. But obviously, are they following the schedule to go ahead with the duties?
Well, obviously, the EU went through a very lengthy process. It's been about a year now since it started its initial investigation, and at different times they've announced different provisional tariffs, and that's based on the investigations that they've done. I mean, they've come here to China, and they've met with auto companies, and they've issued surveys, and they've gone through this consultation period. So that's the final number they came up with, and it's based on their interpretation of the degree of subsidies that these automakers in China received. And to be clear here, other countries around the world, I think, as you know, have slapped on tariffs of 100% right, left, and center. The EU's are very, very specific in particular. And the reason why is because what they want to do is create a level and even playing field. What they want to do is to avoid the distortion that subsidies have had on their own market. As you're aware, there's been an explosion of e-vehicles. It's been a boon to the rest of the world, and from a consumer perspective and an environmental perspective, this is a real gift, you could say, from China. But from an industry perspective, for those that need to adapt with to these changes, it really caused a lot of consternation and concern. And so the EU is united in its approach to free markets, and mitigating the effects of market distortions and dealing with it in a market-based principle way according to EU legislation. But when it comes to how they deal with it, as you probably saw, they had very, very different views. But they did come out with one final conclusion from the EU, and that's the one that you just announced.
Mm-hmm. Well, Adam, tell us, these tariffs are designed to protect the auto industry, which basically says, no, we don't need protection. How do you justify the step by the EU?
I would say it's not. I mean, the word. I think everybody's against protectionism, and everyone's talking about level playing field. So let's work with that concept. And if that's the case, then I really would adhere and pay attention to what the EU Commission's stated goal is, which is mitigating the distorting impact of those subsidies. So I firmly believe that those Chinese companies will still compete in what should be now a fair, according to the EU, a fair-based way. With those subsidies removed, technically speaking, they're now competing on a level playing field. And I think they'll still do very well in the EU market, even with the small subsidy effect or tariff impact that they'll face.
Mm-hmm. John, what do you make? The Chinese companies will probably perform as usual with those extra tariffs?
Well, I mean, look at the empirical evidence. I mean, for the same model of car, these cars being sold in European Union market is actually way more expensive. I mean, I'm talking about before the tariff is applied, way more expensive than the cars being sold in China. So how can it be possible that there's no level playing field if the cars in Europe are being sold more expensively in the first place? Now, second, I want to point out that the so-called subsidies are in no violation of the WTO's anti-dumping and countervailing clause at all. As a matter of fact, the Chinese Ministry of Commerce filed a complaint at WTO the complaint is against the unilaterally instituted new regulatory regime called foreign subsidy regulation in the European Union market. Now, this type of subsidies, mostly in China being provided by local government, these are pre-production subsidies. They are not exclusively associated with exports at all. And this is nothing wrong under the WTO framework. As a matter of fact, let me give you an example. You look at the tens of billions of dollars provided by the European Union to the Airbus. I mean, they have received so many subsidies, and these kind of subsidies are exactly the same. They're not production-specific subsidies. These are development. These are R&D-related subsidies. And it's perfectly legal, actually, to institute this kind of incentive-based industrial policy to foster a electric car industry that is good for the environment, that is good for the climate change, and I think it's a mountain of hypocrisy on the European Union. That on one hand they're talking about the climate agenda.
Yeah.
On the other hand, they actually impose these tariffs, so essentially to attack these few French companies and Italian companies that continue to make these ICE cars, which continue to pollute the air in the European Union sky. So I think this is a whole bunch of hypocrisy. And the whole purpose is very clear: to protect PSA, to protect Renault. They are lagging behind the electric cars. They need to buy some breathing space, essentially, so that they can catch up, which I think it's impossible to do. The only way for them to catch up is to force these companies to compete against competition, not against protection provided by the European Union.
Well, let me have a Claire. I mean, protectionism, or whatever you call it, do you think that will work? That will protect the European automakers somehow? That will catch up with their Chinese competitors?
I'll give them time to catch their breath and start to install the infrastructure that is a prerequisite for the success of EVs in your country. The one thing that shocks me, in long term, the tariffs don't work. If I don't like you, I make you pay for dinner, but it's not a good time to annoy China. People really haven't got the long-term play here. When I see these tariffs, I mean, I like the EU, but I also see how many countries voted against them. And it tends to be the progressive economies, because they understand the tariff. I mean, really, it's just to buy them a bit of time. And I think the real problem for the governments in Europe is they don't have the charging infrastructure in place for the EVs. It's that simple. It's like, I mean, when I go to Hainan, there's 100,000 charging stations on an island the size of Wales. They're aiming for 750,000 by 2030, because it will be an all EV island by 2030. To have an industrial policy, to have impact in terms of fulfilling your low carbon goals, you need sort of a mantra, a message, manufacturing and momentum. China has all four. Whereas Europe's just like, hey, let's go zero carbon. That'll be great. Yeah, we all want to be green. What do you mean? How are you going to execute? How are you going to implement? When we wanted to send everything by railway or canal, the government got to grips with that and built railways and canals in 1850. We're now in 2024. You want to go green? Where's your charging station? Tariffs are really sort of a loser's resort when you feel the competition's a bit hot. Mm-hmm. And I feel very sorry for Europe at the moment. But I think the thing we need to, Ursula, come on over to Shanghai. Come and smell the coffee. Come and visit the EV factories. Because there's a whole, it's not just the EV policy. And we all know it's really about the battery, right? Because the repercussions of inviting that technology into your country and having it made in your country, the ramifications for the economy could be vast. Because we all know the battery is the beginning of whether it's an EV or a flying car, a drone, whatever it is, there is a whole ecosystem of industry that you will miss out on if you do not invite the Chinese NEOs, BYDs, etc. to build in your country. Everybody used to want the Japanese, the American, the European, they wanted to get their trade secrets. Well, here's your opportunity to get China's trade secrets. Europe, here's a little hint. If you invite BYD over, you can reverse engineer their vehicles and learn how to make their batteries. Do it. Cheat. But don't cheat with tariffs. Cheat by inviting them over. Right. Reverse engineering and getting into their supply chains in Congo to build your own batteries. That's my hint.
Yeah, that's advice from Claire. Adam, is that the reason, reportedly the EU is talking separately to the Chinese makers, Geely or SAIC, they denied that. What's the EU strategy? On one hand, they have tariffs. On the other hand, they do engage in discussion with the Chinese side. And then we have the reports. They talk separately, privately with the Chinese individual automakers. What's the purpose? Adam, please. Yeah.
Are you asking me?
Yes.
Sorry, I wasn't too sure who it was for. Yeah, I mean, China obviously is clearly not happy about this, and it has worked particularly hard to try and find a negotiated solution. We at the European Chamber, we've also pushed for a negotiated solution as well. At the end of the day, I think Claire's recommendation for Chinese companies to invest in Europe is also a very practical solution. European companies have been investing in China in the auto sector for 40 years. So I think it would be very, very good if Chinese companies did the same. It would help to bridge this gap that we're seeing between the East and West and create a little bit more understanding and sharing of our markets and best practices and new technologies that have come about because of it.
Right. Speak of investing in EU, also again, it's like rumors, John. It's said that China asked the Chinese companies not to invest in or pause their investing in those countries that voted for the additional tariffs. What do you make?
That's very understandable. I think, I think Chinese companies are indeed investing in European Union. For example, BYD is investing in Hungary. Chery has announced plans to invest in Spain. I think the problem is that the Brussels is not very happy about Chinese companies sort of investment clustering in Hungary. And that's the problem. That's an internal a European Union problem. It happens to be China being caught out as a scapegoat. So this is totally ludicrous to me.
Well, with that, we come to the end for today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also watch us on the CGTN app on YouTube. Thank you for being with us. I'm Xu Qinduo. See you next time.